Welcome to Hercule Poirot Mystery. London, wrapped in its silver fog, hides a secret tonight. A man has vanished. Inspector Arthur Voss of Scotland Yard, his car abandoned by the river, his hat left behind. And the city whispering questions no one can answer. But when the law itself disappears, only one man dares to uncover the truth. The brilliant, meticulous Hercule Poirot. In the affair at Hercule Poirot and the disappearance of Inspector Voss, every smile conceals a lie. Every silence hides a motive, and nothing is quite what it seems. So, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Your quiet room, your car beneath the rain, or somewhere as foggy as Richmond Bridge itself? Let us know in the comments. And prepare to test your own little grey cells before the truth reveals itself. Let's begin. The London evening had wrapped itself in fog, a thick, impenetrable blanket that blurred lamps and muffled sound. Even the rhythmic clatter of cab wheels seemed hesitant, as though afraid to disturb the mist. Within the quiet warmth of his flat on Whitechapel Mansions, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cuffs with delicate precision. The fire crackled, the clock on the mantel chimed 7. Across the table sat Captain Hastings, his old friend and ever-curious chronicler, frowning over an evening newspaper. "My dear Poirot," Hastings said suddenly, tapping the page, "have you seen this? A police inspector has vanished, Inspector Voss, from Scotland Yard. They found his car abandoned near Richmond Bridge this morning. No trace of the man himself." Poirot's thin, dark brows lifted a fraction. "Ah, mon ami, the disappearance of a policeman, how curious. It is usually he who finds, not he who is lost." "There's more," Hastings continued. "He was last seen investigating the theft of some rather valuable jewels belonging to Lady Millicent Darrow. The papers suggest foul play." Poirot rose gracefully and began to pace, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the firelight. "Lady Millicent Darrow," he murmured. "Widow of the late Lord Darrow, the industrialist?" "Yes, I recall. Her soirees are known for their elegance, and her debts for their discretion." His moustache twitched upward in amusement. "A case involving a lady, a disappearance, and jewels. Hastings, it promises the exercise of the little grey cells." Moments later, the telephone shrilled through the room. Poirot picked up the receiver delicately. "Oui, Hercule Poirot speaks." There was a brief exchange. Poirot's voice quiet, precise. Then he set down the receiver, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "It appears, my friend, that we are invited to Richmond. Lady Darrow herself has requested my assistance. Scotland Yard, it seems, prefers to avoid the embarrassment of a missing inspector being linked to a socialite scandal." Hastings whistled. "You mean to say the Yard is keeping it quiet?" Poirot inclined his head. "The truth risks ridicule. Silence becomes golden." They arrived at Darrow House just before 8. The mansion loomed through the fog, its windows glowing faintly like watchful eyes. A butler led them through the marble hall to the drawing-room, where Lady Millicent awaited a woman of striking beauty, her dark hair coiled perfectly, her eyes restless beneath a mask of composure. Around her, a small assembly of guests lingered, whispering. Poirot's gaze swept the room once, noting every glance, every tremor of the hand, every hesitation in breath. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," Lady Millicent began, her voice soft but strained. "You must forgive the short notice. The situation is unbearable." "Madame," Poirot said gently, "it is in moments of discomfort that truth begins to reveal herself. Tell me, if you please, what has occurred." Her fingers tightened on the armrest. "3 nights ago, during a small dinner party, my emerald necklace vanished. Inspector Voss came yesterday to make inquiries. He questioned my guests, and then, after leaving, he disappeared. The police found his car near the river at dawn. The driver's door open, his hat inside, nothing else. Poirot's eyes flickered. "And these guests? Madame, they are present tonight?" She nodded, pale. "Yes. I insisted they remain until matters are clarified." Poirot turned slightly to Hastings. "A closed circle, mon ami. How comforting it narrows the field of deception." Then, to Lady Millicent, "Permit me to meet them. The truth, I think, already waits here in this very room." Hastings glanced around. The nervous butler, a young man in evening wear studying his drink too intently, a pale lady with downcast eyes, a genial, heavy-set gentleman whose laughter seemed forced. Every face, he thought, concealed something. Poirot stood very still, surveying them all with that serene, almost indulgent smile. "Madame," he said softly, "we shall begin." Outside, the fog pressed closer to the glass. Somewhere far away, a clock struck 9, steady, unrelenting. The investigation of Inspector Voss's disappearance had begun. The air inside Darrow House was heavy with tension, the kind that thickens silence until it hums. Poirot, with his hands clasped neatly behind his back, allowed his eyes to rest momentarily on each of the faces assembled before him. The fire hissed softly in the grate, and outside, the fog pressed against the tall windows like a living thing. Hastings felt the room itself, holding its breath. Lady Millicent's composure had begun to waver. Beneath her veneer of grace, there was a flicker of fear. She moved toward a chair by the fire, her voice trembling slightly as she introduced her guests. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, allow me to present my companions of that unfortunate evening. Colonel Rivington, my late husband's oldest friend. Miss Violet Harcourt, my companion and secretary. Mr. Edmund Blake, an artist of considerable reputation. And Dr. Lionel Havisham, who was also present at dinner that night." Each nodded in turn, but Poirot's sharp eyes had already absorbed more than their names could convey. The colonel's rigid posture and clipped tone bespoke military pride, yet his eyes darted nervously toward the door. The artist, tall, handsome, and faintly disheveled, had an expression that hovered between curiosity and amusement. Miss Harcourt, pale and composed, watched Poirot intently, as though measuring every word he might speak. The doctor, broad-shouldered and jovial, exuded the air of a man determined to appear untroubled. "It was a private dinner," Lady Millicent continued. "Only the 5 of us, and, of course, my butler, Hammond. The emerald necklace was kept in my dressing room until I wore it after dinner. For just an hour. I placed it back myself before midnight. The next morning, it was gone." Poirot inclined his head politely. "And Inspector Voss came to investigate?" "Yes. He was thorough, too thorough, perhaps. He questioned us each alone, took notes, examined the rooms. He left just before 10 last night. The next thing we knew—" She paused, her voice faltering. "His car was found by the river." Poirot's expression softened. "Madame, may I inquire, had Inspector Voss discovered anything that caused unease among your guests?" For a heartbeat, the silence grew taut. Then Colonel Rivington spoke, his voice brisk. The man was officious. He hinted at scandal, suggested Lady Millicent's financial difficulties might well, that she might have insured the jewels and misplaced them deliberately. Outrageous suggestion. Lady Millicent's eyes flashed with indignation. "I dismissed him at once. I told him to return to Scotland Yard if he wished to continue such insinuations." Poirot's moustache quivered faintly, the only sign of emotion. "You are distressed, madame, and rightly so. Yet it is not the truth that wounds, but the fear of it. Tell me, who among you was the last to see Inspector Voss?" "I was," said Miss Harcourt suddenly. Her voice was soft but steady. "He asked to speak with me privately before he left. He seemed troubled, said there was something about the case that did not fit." "He didn't say what? Did he mention he had found the jewels?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing of the sort." Poirot nodded. his gaze fixed upon her, as though she were a chess piece whose next move he had already foreseen. "And did anyone follow him out?" "I did," said the doctor, his voice breaking the tension. "I'd left my coat in the vestibule and saw him leaving. He was perfectly calm, walking toward his car. I thought nothing more of it." Poirot stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "Calm, you say? Yet Miss Harcourt describes him as troubled. Curious, n'est-ce pas?" The doctor's brow furrowed. "Perhaps I misread him." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps you saw what you wished to see." He turned to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. The fog rolled beyond the glass, swallowing the garden in shadow. "This house? It is very still. No servants moving about, no footsteps, no sound. And yet," he said softly, "in such silence, the truth always whispers. We must only listen." Hastings shifted uneasily. "You think the inspector might have been well?" Silenced. Poirot's gaze lingered on the reflection of the guests in the darkened glass. "When a man vanishes, Hastings, it is not the act itself that matters, but the reason behind it. He disappears either to escape or to conceal." He turned back, his eyes narrowing with that familiar spark of deduction. "Tomorrow morning, we shall reconstruct every detail of that evening. Every step, every glance, every word spoken. For now, madame, no one must leave the house. The truth, I think, is closer than any of you. Suspect." As they departed the drawing-room, Poirot paused near the doorway. His eyes rested briefly on the mantelpiece. A single white glove, delicate and faintly smudged with dust, lay beside an untouched glass of wine. He did not touch it. He only smiled to himself, that small, knowing smile Hastings had come to dread. "Mon ami," he said quietly as they ascended the stairs. "There are moments when the air in a house changes, when one feels not grief, but guilt. Tonight, I felt both. And somewhere in the distance, through the heavy shroud of fog, the faint sound of water against the riverbank echoed like a whisper of the past, waiting to be uncovered. The morning broke grey and sullen over Richmond, the fog still hanging low as though reluctant to surrender the secrets of the night. Poirot stood at the window of the guest room allotted to him, peering out through the thin veil of mist. He was already immaculate. As always, his tie precisely knotted, his moustache gleaming with perfection. Hastings entered carrying a tray of coffee, his expression one of restless curiosity. "Not a wink of sleep, Poirot. I kept thinking of that missing inspector. What if he fell into the river?" Poirot turned slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "If he fell, mon ami, he did not fall by accident. The English River, she does not reach out and take policemen for a stroll. Non, someone wished him gone. The question is why." They descended to breakfast where Lady Millicent awaited them, pale and composed but visibly strained. The guests had gathered once more, each clinging to their veneer of civility. The clinking of cutlery sounded too loud in the oppressive quiet. Poirot ate little, but observed much. He noticed Miss Harcourt's eyes dart often toward the window, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. Colonel Rivington stirred his tea absently, lost in thought, while Dr. Havisham maintained his practiced joviality, a man forcing laughter where none belonged. When the meal concluded, Poirot rose. "Madame," he said gently, "with your permission, I would like to retrace Inspector Voss's steps from last evening. It is often in repetition that the truth decides to reveal herself." Lady Millicent nodded. "Of course. Anything that may help." The group moved to the drawing-room, just as it had been the night before. Poirot began with quiet deliberation. "We will proceed as if we are the inspector himself. He entered here at 8:30. Yes?" "Yes," said Lady Millicent. "He questioned us together at first, then individually. Bon. Let us begin with the questioning. Hastings, you will play our unfortunate Inspector Voss." Hastings looked startled. "Me? Oui, mon ami." You have the manner, perhaps not the mind, but the moustache will suffice." That provoked a brief ripple of uneasy laughter among the guests, which Poirot noted with care. As Hastings stood near the mantel, imitating the inspector's supposed stance, Poirot circled the room slowly. He spoke with each of you separately. "Let us imagine the order. Miss Harcourt first, then Colonel Rivington, then the doctor, and lastly Lady Millicent. Oui?" The colonel confirmed it with a curt nod. Poirot gestured toward the door. "The inspector leaves at 10. The butler hears the car start?" "Yes," Lady Millicent said softly. "Hammond told me he heard the motor outside, then nothing more." Poirot's head tilted. "Nothing more. Curious. Did anyone else hear the car?" No one spoke. The silence deepened, thick with unspoken unease. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. And yet the car was found near the river, doors open, hat inside. He had been gone scarcely an hour. "Tell me, what is near the river, Hastings?" "Old boathouses," Hastings replied. "Some abandoned, some in use by locals." "Just so," Poirot murmured. "A man does not drive there by chance. He was either lured or following something he believed important." His eyes rested briefly on Miss Harcourt. "You said he seemed troubled, mademoiselle. Perhaps he had discovered something that led him out there." She looked up sharply. "I don't know. He only said there was a detail that did not fit." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, the detail, the thing that pricks at the mind like a splinter. It is always small, always overlooked." He turned suddenly toward the fireplace. "Last night, I noticed a glove. N'est ce pas? Where is it now?" The butler, who had been standing silently, stepped forward. "I took it to the servants' quarters, sir. Thought it belonged to one of the ladies." Poirot extended a hand. "Fetch it." "If you please." Moments later, the butler returned with the delicate white glove, now resting in a small box. Poirot took it carefully, holding it to the light. A smudge, faint but clear. Not dust. Hastings ash. Cigarette ash, of a rather distinctive type. Dr. Havisham frowned. "Surely that means nothing." "Poirot, half of London smokes." "Indeed," Poirot agreed softly. "And yet, none of you smoke in this house except you, Doctor." The room went still. The doctor's laugh came too quickly. "Coincidence. I often carry ash on my cuffs." "Perhaps," said Poirot mildly. "Or perhaps Inspector Voss carried it here himself if he handled something belonging to you." A flush crept into Havisham's cheeks. "That's absurd." "Nothing is absurd, Doctor," Poirot said quietly. "Only premature conclusions are absurd. But we must not leap. We must walk." He set the glove down and turned to Lady Millicent. "I would like to see your dressing room, the place where the necklace vanished." She hesitated but led him upstairs. The others followed, reluctant shadows. Inside the lavish room, sunlight filtered weakly through gauze curtains. Poirot examined the jewel case upon the vanity, no sign of forced entry. His eyes wandered to the mirror, where a faint fingerprint marred the silver frame. He noted it, said nothing. Then, at last, he turned. "Madame," he said gently, "the truth is a quiet thing. It hides not behind doors, but in hearts. Someone here knows why the inspector vanished, and before the fog lifts from Richmond, I intend to know as well." Lady Millicent swallowed hard. "Do you think he's alive, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was grave. "That, madame, depends entirely upon how frightened the guilty party has become." Poirot remained standing in Lady Millicent's dressing room long after the others had withdrawn. The faint scent of lavender powder lingered in the air, mingling with the quiet tick of a clock upon the mantel. He moved slowly, his polished shoes whispering against the thick carpet, his gaze traveling across every surface with precise intent. There was order here, too much order. A woman's vanity is usually a stage of living disorder. Perfume bottles slightly out of line, brushes with a stray hair caught in their bristles. But this one had been scrubbed of chaos. Poirot ran a finger delicately across the gleaming surface of the table and frowned at the absence of dust. It had been wiped recently, perhaps in haste. Curious, he murmured softly, half to himself. When all is too perfect, it is imperfection that must be sought. Hastings, standing awkwardly near the doorway, glanced toward him. You think she's hiding something, Poirot? I think, mon ami, that people hide not only what they have done, but also what they have felt. Lady Millicent is frightened, yes, but not only for herself. There is another emotion beneath it. Perhaps guilt, perhaps pity. I have not yet decided. He crouched before the dressing table, peering into the lower drawer where the jewel case had been kept. Observe, Hastings, the small indentation upon the face, velvet lining, where the necklace once rested. Only, note, there are two impressions, not one. The emeralds, naturally, would leave the larger. The smaller, I think, was made by something else placed beside them. Hastings bent to look. A second piece of jewelry, perhaps? None. Something firmer. A key. Perhaps, or a ring of keys. Poirot straightened, eyes bright. Inspector Voss may have seen it when he questioned Lady Millicent. If he suspected that a key had been used to open the case, but then, why was there no sign of forced entry? The thief was no stranger. He had the means to enter without struggle. Their attention was drawn by a knock at the door. It was Hammond, the butler, his expression stiff. Beg pardon, sir. There's a constable downstairs. They've found something near the river. Said to fetch you immediately. Poirot's gaze sharpened, and he adjusted his cuffs with a calmness that seemed deliberate. Then we shall go at once. Hastings. Lady Millicent, you must remain here. No one is to leave the house until I return. The path to the river wound through the misty garden, where the frost still clung to the grass. The constable led them toward the bank where the inspector's car had been discovered. This time, however, a new detail awaited them, a dark shape half hidden among reeds. Poirot stepped forward, the air thick with moisture, and there it was, a man's leather notebook, soaked and swollen from the water. The initials A. V. Barely legible upon the cover. Arthur Voss, Hastings said, his voice low. Poirot crouched and lifted the notebook carefully, shaking off the droplets. Inside, the pages had blurred, but fragments of words remained. Interview Lady Darrow, contradiction Harcourt, the key. Poirot paused, reading with difficulty. It appears, Hastings, that the good inspector also noted this mysterious key. But what was its significance? The constable shifted, uneasily. No body found, sir, only the book. Tide might have carried him away. Poirot shook his head. No, my friend. The river is patient, but not merciful. It does not carry men away without leaving trace. Non. Inspector Voss did not drown by chance. Someone wanted this. He lifted the notebook to vanish with him. They returned to the house as the fog thickened once more, the great building looming like a figure wrapped in mourning. In the drawing room, Poirot requested that all the guests reassemble. They obeyed reluctantly, eyes wary, movements stiff with unease. Poirot placed the damp notebook upon the table. This, he said quietly, was found by the riverbank belonging to Inspector Voss. It tells me that one among you feared discovery. He wrote of contradictions. And contradictions, mes amis, are the footprints of guilt. Colonel Rivington stiffened. Are you accusing us, sir? We've all cooperated fully. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed, and yet, to cooperate is not the same as to tell truth. Miss Harcourt, when you said the inspector seemed troubled, perhaps it was because he had discovered something about you? Her composure faltered. About me? No, that's absurd. Absurd. Yes, Poirot agreed mildly. And yet, last night, you sat near this fireplace. The glove that was found lay beside your chair. Not yours, perhaps, but near enough to suggest you saw who dropped it." Her lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "You did not take the necklace, mademoiselle, but you know who did. That knowledge frightened you. Tell me, was it to protect the guilty or to protect yourself?" For a long moment, she met his gaze. Then, without a word, she turned and fled the room. Hastings sprang forward, but Poirot lifted a hand. "Let her go. When the innocent run, it is not from fear of punishment, but from fear of what they have seen." He turned toward the window, again, where the fog pressed like a secret unspoken. "The threads begin to reveal their pattern, Hastings. The necklace, the inspector, the glove, the key, each piece is placed with care. And when one arranges them just so," he smiled faintly, "the shape they form is almost human." Miss Harcourt's hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor like a cry in the dark. For a fleeting instant, the house seemed to awaken, doors creaked, the fire hissed louder, and the faint tremor of human panic rippled through its walls. Poirot stood perfectly still, his head inclined ever so slightly, listening to the rhythm of retreating steps until they faded. Then, with that calm precision which was more unnerving than anger, he said softly, "Hastings, follow her but not too closely. Observe only." Hastings nodded and slipped out. Poirot turned his gaze upon the remaining guests. The doctor shifted uneasily, clearing his throat, while the colonel's jaw tightened as though bracing for an unseen blow. Lady Millicent sat rigid, fingers gripping her chair, her composure eroding under the quiet scrutiny of those grey-green eyes. "You see," Poirot said in a voice that was almost tender. "Truth. She behaves as a frightened bird. When one approaches too suddenly, she flies. But if one waits, she will return to perch upon one's hand." Dr. Havisham let out a short laugh that rang hollow. "You'll forgive us, Poirot, if we prefer our truths less poetic. The girl is overwrought, anyone would be, under this strain." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "And yet, Doctor, you have not asked the obvious question why she fled at all. Innocence rarely finds its wings so swiftly." Before Havisham could respond, Hastings reappeared, slightly breathless. "She's in the library," he said quietly. "Crying, I think. I didn't disturb her." Poirot gave a small nod. "Bon. She cries because she remembers something terrible, or because she regrets something worse. We shall see which it is." He moved toward the library, his steps light and soundless despite the polished floor. The heavy oak door was half ajar. Inside, Miss Harcourt sat by the window, her face turned toward the pale grey light. Her tears had ceased, but her eyes held the haunted glaze of one who has seen too much. When Poirot entered, she flinched, then composed herself with visible effort. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you must not fear me. I am not the judge, only the observer. You ran because you felt trapped, but flight is a confession of the heart, not the mind. Tell me, what is it that burdens you?" She shook her head. "You wouldn't understand." "I understand more than you think," Poirot replied. "You are loyal, perhaps too loyal. You protect someone who does not deserve your silence." Her lips trembled. "I promised him." "Ah," Poirot said softly, seizing the faintest tremor of meaning. "Then it was a man." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed about to speak, but then she pressed her hands to her face, whispering, "I can't. He'd be ruined." Poirot's tone did not change, yet his gaze sharpened to a razor's edge. "Mademoiselle, there are times when to protect is to destroy. Inspector Voss discovered something he meant to expose. You knew, and you warned the one who feared him. That was your promise, was it not?" She lowered her hands slowly. "He didn't mean for it to happen," she said in a hollow voice. "He only meant to scare the inspector, to make him leave Richmond. But something went wrong." "Then he did meet the inspector by the river," Poirot said quietly. She nodded faintly, her voice breaking. Yes, last night, after he left here, I saw him from my window. He went down the path toward the water, and then I heard shouting. I ran to the terrace, but it was too dark. When I looked again, there was only silence. Who, mademoiselle? Poirot's voice was barely above a whisper. Who went down that path? Her breath hitched. Dr. Havisham. For a moment, only the ticking of the clock filled the room. Poirot did not move. His face was unreadable, though his eyes gleamed like steel beneath calm water. Merci, mademoiselle, he said at last. You have done enough. As they stepped back into the corridor, Hastings exhaled sharply. The doctor! I never suspected him. Poirot smiled faintly. That is why you are an excellent companion, mon ami, but a dreadful detective. You look at actions. I look at silences. The doctor. He has said too little, too easily. They returned to the drawing room where Dr. Havisham and the others still waited. The fire had burned low, throwing long shadows that seemed to sway like ghosts across the walls. Poirot approached the doctor with unhurried grace. Doctor, you are a man of science. You believe in the precision of cause and effect, yes? Of course, Havisham said, his tone guarded. Then let us apply it. Cause. Inspector Voss discovers a secret, perhaps one that concerns a respected gentleman. Effect. The inspector vanishes, leaving behind only his hat, his car, and a notebook that mentions your name. Havisham's face drained of color. You can't possibly mean, Poirot interrupted softly, that the truth, like illness, spreads if untreated. Confess, doctor, before it festers. The colonel half rose. Good God, Poirot. Are you accusing? Poirot raised a hand. None. I am revealing. He turned back to the doctor, his eyes never leaving him. Tell me, when you went down to the river, did you intend to kill him or merely to silence him? The doctor's mouth opened, but no words came. The silence that followed was absolute, thick as the fog outside. And in that silence, a single sound broke through the distant tolling of the church bell. Poirot inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a signal only he could understand. Ah, he murmured. Time announces herself. Soon, we shall all hear what she has to say. Doctor. Havisham's lips trembled as though the air itself had turned to ice around him. The others watched, breathless, waiting for the denial that did not come. The colonel's hand clenched upon the arm of his chair, while Lady Millicent stared with eyes wide and hollow, as if the walls themselves had betrayed her. Poirot stood motionless, his voice calm, deliberate, each word a soft hammer striking truth from stone. Doctor, last night you told me you saw Inspector Voss leaving the house perfectly calm, you said. Yet Miss Harcourt saw you go out after him. Both cannot be true. Unless, of course, you wished us to believe the inspector departed safely while you followed in secret. Havisham's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his features. That girl is hysterical, he snapped. She sees what she wants to see. Ah, murmured Poirot. But the eyes of the frightened see very clearly, Doctor. It is only the guilty who prefer the dark. For a long moment, silence stretched. Then the doctor rose abruptly, striding to the sideboard where a decanter of brandy gleamed. His hand shook as he poured, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. You don't know what you're talking about, Poirot. I went after the inspector. Yes, but only to speak with him, to set things right. Set what right? Poirot asked softly, stepping closer. What could require such secrecy at the riverbank, in fog and shadow? Havisham stared into the glass, his reflection distorted in its surface. He accused me, he said at last, his voice low, of theft, of deceit. He thought I'd taken the necklace myself to pay a gambling debt. I laughed in his face, told him he was mad. But he said he had proof, that he'd return this morning with a warrant. He looked up, eyes burning with desperation. "I swear to you, Poirot, I didn't kill him. I only wanted to frighten him, to make him listen." "Frighten?" Poirot's tone was gentle but cold. "A curious word, Doctor. Fright is a blade one cannot always control, and when it slips—" He made a small gesture, his fingers slicing the air. "Tell me what happened." The doctor hesitated, then spoke, the words spilling fast, as if by releasing them he could undo their weight. "He was waiting by his car. I caught up to him near the river path. We argued. He called me a liar, said he'd expose everything. I grabbed his arm, tried to reason with him. He shoved me back, lost his footing on the embankment. There was a splash, and then nothing. God help me. I panicked. I searched for him, called his name. But the fog swallowed everything. I thought he'd drowned. I ran." Hastings exhaled sharply. Lady Millicent gave a strangled cry, covering her mouth. Poirot's eyes, however, narrowed slightly. "You ran, Doctor, but you did not tell anyone. You let the man be found missing, and you watched while others feared a darker crime. That is not the instinct of innocence, it is the reflex of guilt." Havisham's voice broke. "I thought it would look like murder." Poirot regarded him in silence, his face unreadable. Then, softly, "Perhaps because it was." The words struck like a blow. The doctor stared at him, pale and sweating. "No, you must believe me. He fell, I swear it." Poirot turned slightly toward the window, where the fog pressed thick and grey against the panes. "You say he fell. Yet this morning I found the soil near the river unmarked, no sign of struggle, no broken reeds. The tide was calm last night." "None, Doctor. The inspector did not fall. He was carried." "Carried?" Hastings repeated, startled. Poirot nodded. "We." There were faint wheel tracks leading from the boathouse to the edge of the bank. Not car wheels, smaller. A barrow, perhaps. Someone transported a heavy burden to the water after the quarrel had ended. "You see, my friend," he added, turning back to Havisham, "you may not have killed the inspector, but someone ensured that his body would not be found to contradict you." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Millicent rose suddenly, her hand pressed to her throat. "You mean there's another?" "Exactly so, madame. A second actor upon the stage." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "One who had more to lose than the doctor, and more courage to act. The question is, who knew of the quarrel? Who seized that moment to turn misfortune into advantage?" He let the silence linger, letting each face in the room reveal its flicker of fear. Then, almost idly, his gaze drifted toward the colonel. "Tell me, Colonel Rivington, how long have you known Lady Millicent's late husband's debts were not, in fact, paid?" "Off at his death?" The colonel stiffened. "What are you implying?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Merely that money and loyalty make a dangerous alliance. You were the executor of Lord Darrow's estate. You handled his accounts, his papers, perhaps his wife's affairs as well." A muscle twitched in Rivington's jaw. "You'll watch your tongue, Poirot." But the detective only inclined his head, serene as ever. "Oh, I intend to do more than that, Colonel. I shall watch your hands, for it is they, not your tongue, that have already betrayed you." "A man who smokes as much as you, Colonel, does not wear gloves indoors unless he has something to hide beneath them." Rivington's face went white. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper, smooth and merciless. "Last night, someone returned to the river after the quarrel, someone who carried the weight of a man and the scent of tobacco upon his coat. The inspector's notebook mentions ash upon a white glove. Doctor, you were accused falsely, but you were not alone in the darkness." The colonel rose abruptly, knocking his chair back, his composure cracking. "You can't prove a thing." Poirot's eyes glittered. "None, Colonel. But by tonight, when the river yields what it holds, then we shall see who is truly drowning." The silence that followed was electric, alive with tension, as though the air itself dared not move. Colonel Rivington stood frozen, his chest rising and falling in heavy, uneven breaths. The veins on his temple pulsed, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed carved from marble. Lady Millicent had turned deathly pale, her hands gripping the edge of the chair until her knuckles whitened. Poirot's gaze did not waver. He simply waited, poised as ever, letting the weight of his words sink in. At last, the colonel's voice came hoarse, sharp, brittle. "You've made quite the accusation, Monsieur Poirot. I demand you either prove it or retract it." Poirot's head inclined slightly, the faintest smile at the corner of his lips. "I do not retract truth, Colonel. I simply allow it to breathe." The colonel took a step forward, his boots thudding against the floor. "And what truth is that, sir? That I went for a walk last night? That I wear gloves because the weather is cold? You weave shadows into shapes that aren't there." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Ah, but sometimes it is only in shadow that the true outline reveals itself. You see, I have been thinking of motives. The doctor had fear, but fear alone does not carry a body to the river. Miss Harcourt had loyalty, but loyalty does not smear ash upon a white glove. Lady Millicent had desperation, but desperation does not smoke cigars, imported only by Colonel Rivington." Hastings's eyes widened. "By Jove! Poirot, you can't mean—" "I mean, Hastings," Poirot interrupted gently, "that one may wipe clean the glass of a decanter, one may polish the mantle, even scrub the soil from one's boots, but the scent of guilt, that lingers." Poirot turned his attention back to the colonel. "You were once a soldier, a man of precision, of strength. Lord Darrow trusted you, non, yet his widow's accounts show money missing, funds withdrawn quietly, under your stewardship. When the inspector began asking questions, you realized your name might surface in his report. And so, when the quarrel between Voss and the doctor gave you opportunity, you seized it." Rivington's face contorted, fury flashing across it like lightning. "Utter nonsense. You've no proof. No witness, only insinuations." "Ah, but I have both," Poirot said softly. "You see, the glove found beside the wine-glass bore a smudge of cigar, ash thick, dark, with the faint trace of Turkish blend. This morning, when I examined the colonel's overcoat in the vestibule, I found the same ash within its pocket lining. A coincidence, perhaps, until I noticed the cuff of the glove had a faint tear, as though from a signet ring." Poirot's voice lowered, the room tightening around him. "You wear such a ring, Colonel, the crest of your regiment. A soldier's pride, but also, perhaps, his ruin." Rivington's composure faltered. "You're bluffing." Poirot's hand moved to his pocket and drew out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it with care, revealing a mud-stained fragment of fabric. This was found near the river. Caught in the reeds, a piece of coat sleeve, torn clean. "The thread is identical to your uniform. I imagine the struggle was brief, but fierce. Inspector Voss fought back, but the fall rendered him unconscious. You, being a practical man, did what was necessary. You used the doctor's quarrel as your cover, ensuring suspicion would rest where you guided it." Lady Millicent gave a small gasp. "Colonel, is it true?" Rivington's eyes darted to her, and for a single fleeting moment, the proud mask cracked. "I did it for you, Millicent," he hissed. "For all of us. He would have destroyed everything, your name, your fortune. You'd have been left with nothing." Poirot's expression softened with pity. "And yet, in saving her, you doomed yourself." The colonel's face turned ashen. "I didn't mean to kill him," he muttered, his voice trembling now. He slipped, hit the stones. "I panicked. I thought if I made it look like the doctor's quarrel had gone wrong, if the river took him, no one would ever know. But the river, she gives back what she takes, and soon she will return her secret." The colonel sank heavily into his chair, hands trembling. Outside, a distant horn sounded along the river, a search boat calling across the mist. Poirot turned toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "You see, Hastings," he said softly, "evil often wears the face of devotion. The colonel acted not for greed alone, but for love, and love, when it fears loss, can be the most ruthless of motives." Lady Millicent bowed her head, her voice breaking. "God forgive us all." Poirot regarded her quietly, then straightened his cuffs with deliberate precision. "God may forgive, madame, but justice she prefers evidence." A knock echoed through the hall. Hammond entered, pale and shaken. "Monsieur Poirot, they've found something downstream." Poirot's eyes met Hastings's. "At last," he murmured. "The river speaks." The words hung in the air like a chill draught. "They've found something downstream." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The fire in the grate snapped sharply, as if mocking the stillness. Poirot's gaze flickered briefly toward the colonel, who sat motionless, his shoulders hunched, the defiance drained from his eyes. Then, without a word, Poirot turned and followed Hammond toward the door, Hastings close behind. The others remained behind, frozen between dread and disbelief. The path to the river was slick with mist, the morning sun struggling to pierce the grey veil that hung low over the water. The constables were gathered at the edge of the bank, their boots sinking into the soft mud. One of them stepped forward as Poirot approached, his face pale, voice hushed. "They pulled him out, Sir Inspector Voss. He's been dead some time." Poirot's expression did not change, though his eyes darkened. "You are certain it is him?" "Yes, sir. Identification from his badge and notebook. Poor devil must have gone in head first. Skull fracture, most likely from the rocks." "Ah," Poirot murmured, his voice soft but distant. "But the river? She tells only part of the story." He crouched beside the body where it lay beneath a tarpaulin. With a careful hand he lifted the edge, revealing the inspector's lifeless face, pale, serene, almost peaceful beneath the silt that streaked his cheek. Poirot studied the wounds, the torn collar, the faint bruising along the wrists. His fingertips brushed lightly against the fabric of the coat, tracing a line where the mud ended abruptly. "Non," he said finally. "This man was not pushed into the river alive. He was already unconscious or dead. See here, Hastings, the water has not entered the lungs. He did not drown." Hastings frowned, his voice low. "Then the colonel's story is incomplete," Poirot finished softly. "He spoke of panic, of an accident. But an accident leaves chaos, scratches, torn fabric, signs of struggle. This was tidy, precise. The kind of death delivered by a steady hand." The constable shifted uneasily. "But the colonel confessed, didn't he?" Poirot stood, dusting his gloves. "A confession born of guilt, yes, but perhaps not guilt of murder. You see, my friend, remorse is not proof. Sometimes the innocent confess to crimes of the heart rather than crimes of the law." He turned, scanning the mist-shrouded riverbank, his gaze narrowing on the faint impressions leading away from the water's edge. "Look there, 2 sets of prints. One heavy, belonging to a man of weight and strength, and another, lighter, smaller. The first stops near the water, but the second returns to the path. Someone else was here after the colonel." Hastings's eyes widened. "You mean someone finished what the colonel started?" Poirot's tone grew grave, or corrected it. They followed the trail a few yards up the path until it faded into the gravel near the old boathouse. Poirot paused, his eyes narrowing at a faint glimmer caught between the planks. A small, golden brooch, shaped like a lily, its clasp bent. He lifted it carefully with his handkerchief. "Curious," he murmured. "This does not belong to the inspector, nor the colonel, but it does, I think, belong to a lady." Hastings blinked. "Lady Millicent." Poirot's moustache twitched. Who else would wear such a delicate piece and lose it near the very place where her sins were washed away? They returned to the house in silence, the weight of revelation pressing upon every step. Lady Millicent met them at the threshold, her face as pale as marble, her eyes rimmed red. "Is it true?" she whispered. "They found him?" Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, madame. The inspector is found. But with him, the truth begins to rise also. Tell me, how long have you worn the lily brooch?" Her gaze faltered. "The lily, why do you ask?" "Because it lies by the river bank," Poirot said quietly, "where the inspector met his end." For a moment she said nothing, her lips trembling. Then, as though a thread had snapped, she turned away, clutching the edge of the mantle. "He wasn't meant to die," she whispered. "He came back after the others had gone. He told me he knew everything, that the colonel had taken money, that I had lied to protect him. He threatened to ruin us both unless I gave him the jewels. I only wanted to stop him from shouting. I struck him. Just once." Her words broke into a sob. "He fell, hit the step. There was blood. I thought, oh God, I thought he was dead. The colonel came, found me there, and said he'd make it right. I didn't ask how." Poirot's voice was soft but unyielding. "So you gave him the necklace to buy silence?" She nodded faintly. "He said he'd make it disappear. I thought it was over." Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Madame, evil rarely ends where one intends it. It grows like ivy, strangling all that shelters it." She sank into a chair, her tears silent now. Hastings shifted uneasily, pity warring with shock. Poirot looked toward the window where the fog had begun to lift, revealing the faint shimmer of the river beyond. And thus, Hastings, the tale, completes itself. The doctor quarreled, the colonel concealed, and the lady, in desperation, struck. 3 truths, each incomplete alone but together. They form the tragedy entire. Hastings swallowed. "Then, she's to be arrested?" Poirot's expression softened. "Justice will have her due. But sometimes, mon ami, it is not for us to decide which crime is greater, the act or the love that drives it." Outside, the sunlight broke through at last, glinting on the water's surface where the river had surrendered its secret. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his voice almost a sigh. "The affair of Inspector Voss is ended, Hastings. But never forget, murder is not born of hatred alone. Often, it comes softly, dressed as devotion." For a long moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. The confession hung between them, fragile and trembling like a candle flame in the wind. Outside, the fog had begun to thin, revealing the glimmer of the river below. Calm now, as if weary from concealing so much sin. Poirot stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Lady Millicent, his expression neither triumphant nor pitying, but something quieter, sadder perhaps. She sat still, her hands clasped in her lap, the faintest tremor in her fingers. "It was an accident," she whispered, her voice raw, frayed with exhaustion. "He grabbed my wrist," he shouted, "and I—" Her breath hitched. "I didn't mean to strike him so hard. When he fell, I thought he couldn't be." Poirot inclined his head gently. "And yet, madame, when one fears disgrace, one's heart does not reason, it acts. Fear, like love, is a most dangerous master." The colonel stirred from his seat, his face a picture of torment. "She did what she thought she must," he said hoarsely. "Voss cornered her, threatened her reputation, her family's name. You've no idea what that means to a woman in her position, Poirot. I told her I'd handle it. I carried the body, hid the evidence. I was trying to protect her." "We," Poirot said softly. "And in doing so, you made yourself her accomplice." He turned, his eyes sweeping over the room, the shattered remnants of pride and loyalty. Love turned to ruin. The necklace, the quarrel, the glove, all fragments of a single truth. Each of you, in your own way, contributed to the death of Inspector Voss, the hand that struck, the mind that concealed, the silence that followed. Miss Harcourt, who had been standing quietly near the window, spoke at last, her voice trembling. "She didn't deserve this," she whispered. "None of them did. He was cruel, that inspector. He frightened her deliberately, as though he enjoyed it. I heard him that night, his voice raised, threatening her. Poirot turned to her, his gaze softening slightly. Ah, mademoiselle, your loyalty has been your burden. You knew more than you said you saw the truth, yet you held it, hoping to spare them. But silence, too, it can be a crime when it gives shelter to the guilty. Her eyes filled with tears. I only wanted to protect her. We, Poirot said, almost kindly. As did they all. But protection is not love, it is control, it is fear, and both lead to destruction. He stepped closer to Lady Millicent, his voice low, almost intimate now. You were once a woman of grace and intelligence, admired by all, yet grief has a way of eroding the soul. When your husband died, you found yourself surrounded by men who offered help, but demanded devotion in return. Colonel Rivington's loyalty, the doctor's attentions, even the inspector's inquiries, each sought to claim a piece of you. You were trapped, hemmed in by your own charm. Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering. So what was I to do? Monsieur Poirot, what would you have done if your name, your life, were about to be destroyed? Poirot's reply came softly, almost mournful. I, madame, have no name to protect, only the truth. And truth, unlike reputation, does not die when the world looks away. There was a long silence. Then the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, the constable returning, his hat in hand, eyes downcast. We've sent word to Scotland Yard, sir. They'll be here shortly. Poirot nodded once. Merci. See that Lady Darrow and the colonel remain here until they arrive. As the constable departed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice low, troubled. I say, old man, she's not really a criminal, is she? Not in the usual sense. The inspector provoked her. She acted in panic. Poirot looked at him gravely. Murder is rarely committed by monsters, Hastings. It is the work of ordinary people, cornered by circumstance. That is what makes it so terrible. They stood together in the doorway for a moment, watching Lady Millicent. The fog outside had nearly lifted, sunlight spilling weakly across the drawing-room floor. She sat motionless, her face turned toward the light as though seeking absolution from something far beyond the reach of men. Poirot straightened his cuffs with delicate precision. You see, Hastings, he said quietly, there is no satisfaction in such a case. No triumph, only sadness. The inspector was not a good man, but he did not deserve to die. And Lady Millicent, she did not wish to kill, but one cannot strike at fear without striking at oneself. Hastings sighed deeply. So it's all over then? Poirot's gaze shifted toward the river, where the constables still moved about, their figures distant and small against the shimmering water. Over? He repeated softly. Non, mon ami, for those who remain. It never ends. The body may be buried, but the guilt, it lingers, whispering in the quiet hours, reminding one that order has been broken, and order, as you know, is what I cherish above all. As they turned to leave the room, a single beam of sunlight fell upon the mantelpiece, where the white glove had first rested, a silent reminder of how it all began. Poirot paused briefly, then murmured, "The smallest things." Hastings, the smallest things always betray the largest truths. And as the clock chimed noon, marking the end of the long, dreadful night, Poirot's eyes held that familiar glint of melancholy wisdom. The river keeps its secrets for a while, he said softly, but even she cannot hide the conscience of man. The afternoon light slanted across the drawing-room, turning the polished floor to pale gold. Outside, the constables' voices drifted faintly from the garden, the distant hum of the river mingling with the rustle of trees. Lady Millicent sat very still, the poise that once defined her now fragile, like porcelain holding the memory of grace. Colonel Rivington stood by the window, his head bowed, while Miss Harcourt hovered in the doorway, her eyes red and hollow. The house itself seemed to sigh, relieved and sorrowful all at once. Poirot, ever meticulous, moved quietly through the room, his fingertips grazing the back of a chair, his gaze lingering on each small object: the clock, the crystal decanter, the wilted lilies in their vase. Every detail spoke of endings, yet his eyes still held a spark, as if some thread remained unpulled, some question unanswered. "Poirot," Hastings said softly, breaking the silence. "It's done, isn't it? The Yard will take her away. The Colonel too. There's nothing more to be said." Poirot turned, his expression unreadable. "Ah, but there is always something more, Hastings. Always one thread, so fine, so delicate, that all others depend upon it." Hastings frowned. "You mean, you still think there's something missing?" Poirot moved toward the fireplace, where the faint outline of a long cold ash still clung to the hearth. "Oui, mon ami. Consider, Lady Millicent says she struck Inspector Voss once, and he fell. The Colonel says he found her, weeping beside the body, and carried it to the river. And yet—" He crouched slightly, his gaze fixed on the floor. The inspector's skull fracture was not caused by a fall to the step, but by a blow delivered from above, strong, deliberate, fatal, the kind of blow that leaves no second chance. The words rippled through the room. Lady Millicent's head snapped up, confusion dawning in her eyes. The Colonel's breathing quickened. "You're saying she didn't kill him?" Poirot rose, his gaze sharp as a blade. "None. She struck him, yes, but not fatally. When she fled the room, believing him dead, someone else entered. Someone who saw opportunity in tragedy. Someone who feared the inspector's discovery even more than scandal." Miss Harcourt gave a small gasp. "No, it can't be." Poirot's eyes turned to her. "Ah, mademoiselle, it can. You were the last to see him alive before that night. You said he seemed troubled, that he spoke of a detail that did not fit. What was that detail, What did you fear he had discovered?" She backed away a step, her face pale, trembling. I only wanted to help Lady Millicent. I thought if I warned him to leave her alone." Poirot advanced, calm but relentless. "You followed him, did you not? After the Colonel took the body, you went to the river. You saw the truth, the inspector still alive, struggling for breath, and in that moment, mademoiselle, mercy and panic became one." Her lips parted in horror. "He would have ruined her," she whispered. "He would have destroyed everything. I couldn't let that happen." Hastings stared in disbelief. "Good heavens! Poirot, you mean she?" Poirot said softly. "It was Miss Harcourt who ended it." She pressed his head beneath the water, believing it kindness, believing it justice. The glove near the wine-glass, it was hers, not Lady Millicent's. She dropped it when she came back inside, trembling, certain the act would remain unseen. But, alas, mademoiselle, the smallest things betray the largest truths. Miss Harcourt sank to her knees, a strangled sob escaping her throat. "I only wanted to save her," she cried. "I loved her more than my own life." Poirot's voice was almost kind. "Yes, mademoiselle, that is what made you dangerous." The constables entered quietly then, their faces grim but respectful. One of them took Miss Harcourt's arm gently, helping her to her feet. Lady Millicent rose, her face etched with shock and sorrow. "Violet, oh, my dear girl." Miss Harcourt looked at her with desperate tenderness. "I did it for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "So you could live, so none of them could touch you again." Lady Millicent's hand went to her heart as the younger woman was led away, her steps unsteady but unresisting. When the door closed behind her, silence descended once more deep, absolute, and aching. Poirot stood still, his gaze lowered. "So ends the affair, Hastings. A tale of fear devotion, and despair. The inspector's ambition destroyed him. Lady Millicent's pride betrayed her, and Miss Harcourt's love condemned them all. Hastings swallowed hard. "It's a dreadful business, Poirot. There's no triumph in it." Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his voice soft and solemn. "Non, mon ami. Only the lesson that reason learns from the heart, that every lie, even told in love, must one day meet the truth." He walked to the window then, watching as the constables led Miss Harcourt down the path toward the waiting carriage. The mist had lifted entirely now, revealing the tranquil sweep of the river, serene and indifferent. Poirot's reflection stared back at him in the glass, precise, immaculate, but weary. "There is justice," he murmured, "but there is never peace." As he turned to leave, Lady Millicent whispered from behind him, "Monsieur Poirot, will they hang her?" Poirot paused in the doorway. "Perhaps, madame, but the punishment of the body is nothing compared to the burden of the soul. She will carry that far longer." He glanced once more toward the fading river light, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ah, Hastings, it is always so. In the end, love is the greatest crime of all." And as the sun slipped below the horizon, the great detective's figure disappeared into the evening mist, small, precise, and solitary, leaving behind a house filled with silence, and a tragedy that no justice could ever truly mend.